In today's KaijuVFX tutorial, we're creating the effect of one of Yapool's maniacal Choju breaking into our dimension, as iconically seen in Ultraman Ace and Mebius. This was requested by Patreon supporter Ultrayab. Jumping straight into it, first we're going to recreate the effect of the sky cracking before the Choju breaks through. You could probably find a nice glass crack texture and composite that in and reveal it with a mask, and boring. Let's do this ourselves right inside of After Effects. We're going to create a new solid and apply Advanced Lightning. If we switch the lightning type to Omni, we get this really customizable effect where the farther away from the origin point we move the end point, the more the strike of lightning is revealed. I tweaked the decay settings a bit until I found a suitable length and style of bolt that best resembled part of a cracking piece of glass. I then animated the visible radius using the lightning's endpoint to reveal the entire crack after a few frames. I duplicated this layer and altered the conductivity state to make the crack point in a different direction. I repeated this process many times, offsetting each crack by a few frames in the timeline, until we finally had this, big spiderweb forming in the sky. I pre-composed all the lightning crack layers together, so they could be in one workable layer. To add some subtle color variety, I added a 4-color gradient effect, and set the 4 points to be different shades of red, placing them in different spots around the crack, giving it a subtle change in lighting in certain spots. I also added a vector blur to mildly crush the highlights in and muddy the overall image, and a glow to make it a bit otherworldly. Next, I created this white hotspot element that flashes around in the sky as the cracks form in the show. I made a new white solid, made a small circular mask at the center, and feathered it out a tad. This would act as our single hotspot element. I animated the scale and opacity to make it fade in and out, and increase and decrease in size like it appears to in Mebius. It gives the effect of subtle motion and activity to help give the image some life. Again, I duplicated this layer and displaced it all throughout the cracks as they formed, and I tried to put hotspots where new cracks were just showing up to give them a bit of motivation. I pre-composed all of those again, and I set the blend mode to additive. I then duplicated this pre-comp, and on the new one I added a fast box blur and a glow effect to give a bit of a wider area of effect on these flashing lights on the sky. The last step in recreating these cracks was just adding some quick lightning strikes that would appear quickly throughout the forming crack in the sky. Are you tired of me saying crack yet? Anyway, if you watched my last tutorial on Gamora's super oscillatory wave, I used the same technique here of animating the conductivity state for a frame and then fading out the opacity of the strike, all within a few frames. I duplicated and displaced these elements all throughout the cracks. I tried to link together those hotspots and the red cracks when I could to give the lightning a bit more motivation. Whew, we've got a really beautiful sky about to break open. Now let's get to the fun part. I pre-composed all of the elements that we've been using so far into one layer. This would make it helpful to make sure everything stayed together in what we're about to do next. Apply a shatter effect to the pre-comp. Right away you can see what we're going to be doing here. By default, shatter has this more brick-like breaking pattern, so let's change that into more of a glass shape. If we go into the shape settings, we can select the pattern to be glass. We can play around with the number of repetitions, which basically will determine how many shards a layer will break into, so toy around with this for your own preferences. And I also decreased the extrusion depth to make it look a bit more realistic. In the Force 1 tab, we can decrease the radius of the shatter force, letting us reduce the size of the broken area in the sky to match the crack that we made earlier. In the Physics tab, feel free to play around with some of the settings there as well. I chose to increase the random rotation and tumbling of the bits of glass, and also lowered the gravity amount a bit to give the impression that these were very big chunks of the sky being shattered away. One issue we run into when using shatter is that it automatically starts the breaking process at the very start of the layer. To remedy this, I just duplicated the layer and pre-composed the copy trimmed further down the timeline, then reapplied the shatter effect. A bit of a pain, but it fixes the issue. Also, and this is probably not necessary depending on your compositing flow, but a cool tool in Shatter is that you can choose to render either only the base layer with the hole, or the pieces being broken off by themselves, in addition to the whole thing in one layer. I duplicated the shatter layer again so that I could set the bottom layer to only render the base sky and the top one to only render the shattering pieces. This was probably just an unnecessary step, but this may help if you want certain objects to come between the sky and the falling pieces. So next I had to create Yapool's extra dimensional domain to place behind the sky. I just threw something together really quick. In a new composition, I added a solid and applied fractal noise. I did a quick keyframe animation on the offset turbulence Y value to give the illusion of rising smoke. I applied a vector blur and a fast box blur to make it all very softened out. Then I made another solid with CC particle world, and I made a quick system of slowly rising faded sphere type particles. Nothing complex or intensive at all. Again, I colorized those to be red, and blurred them out a good bit. All of this gives the whole scene a good bit of depth and variety in the visual animation going on. And then I dragged this Yapool dimension comp into the main composition and placed it behind all of the sky layers. And that's it. Super painless and honestly really fun to see this whole thing come together in the end. After all this, I just did some proper compositing with Super Comp to tidy up the work a bit and give it the finishing touches. I hope today gives you some inspiration to experiment with the shatter effect. When used real creatively, you can do some awesome stuff like blow up buildings and kaiju and pretty much anything. So thanks for watching. If you want to get a tutorial made for a kaiju related effect of your choice, head on over to patreon.com/DaikaijuLegends, where you can get that and access to our entire library of KaijuVFX elements. We just recently released a pack of 21 finisher moves inspired by classic Showa Ultraman to our $5 supporters, so be sure to check that out. Happy compositing. Big thanks as always to all of our Patreon supporters, including Jaws Infinity, Project Godzilla, Goji73, Justice, Riverlane, Godzilla Productions TV, Professor Kaiju, Asusa Productions, The Toho Society, Asriel, Gomzilla 1985, The Immortal Red Fox, Neil Not Neil Thompson, Eric Trin, Inaba, The Rabid Walrus, Ultraman Ultimo, Scry, Ultriab, Jeff King, Johnny Sacco, Andrew S., Saint Nick, Gojira91, Palmerbash, Dustin Beetle and The Next Decade Props and Costumes, William Zorio, GWR Zilla, Hayden Bell, and Deadzilla.